Amphibian populations have been declining on the global scale since the 1980s. Amphibians are one of the lesser-known vertebrate groups, having nearly half of the currently known amphibian species being only recognized since the 1960s, and about 25% of them are data deficient, which means there are not enough data to form a conservation status. Of the species with sufficient data, almost 30% are considered threatened. There are many reasons why we are losing our amphibians. Many people believe the deadly chytrid fungus is solely to blame, but as you can see in the graph, other factors such as habitat change, invasive species, and use of pesticides are to blame. While doing my research, I interviewed Dr. Daniel Meinhardt, who is a biology professor at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. He has a Bachelor's of Science from Southern Illinois University Edwardsville and a PhD in Amphibian Development and Evolution from the University of Kansas. I focused my research on two main culprits for the amphibian population decline. The first being the use of herbicides, particularly atrazine, and the second being the chytrid fungus.
All right, so you asked me to talk a little bit about amphibian population declines. I don't have a lot of experience in the same area, but I do know from having worked with people over in Minnesota and also down in Kansas that it's very common that people are seeing significant declines in populations that they've been watching for a period of years. I know from the literature there are several instances where species have declined and completely disappeared from areas. The northern cricket frog, for example, Icrus crepitans, has just about disappeared from Minnesota and from most parts of Wisconsin, and they remain pretty common in other areas, so it's really kind of puzzling as to why that's happening. I don't think anybody really quite knows. It seems likely that chemicals that mimic endocrine signals, hormones, are likely having an effect. We know that a lot of chemicals can mimic the effects of estrogen or enhance the effect of estrogen, and in some cases that's causing male frogs to become feminized. It's turning their testicular tissue into ovarian tissue, which of course makes it difficult for them to reproduce.
Atrazine is the most widely used herbicide in the United States. It is produced by the company Syngenta and has a worldwide value of at least $400 million, but has many negative effects, and because of it, has been banned in the United Kingdom. It is a known carcinogen linked to prostate cancer in many Syngenta employees, and in frogs it causes many deformities such as extra limbs. Atrazine is also an endocrine blocker, so in male frogs it restricts the growth of their larynx, not allowing them to call for mates. Atrazine also causes production of ovaries and eggs in male frogs. These changes occur because atrazine triggers an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone into a form of estrogen. Studies found that this feminization occurs with just 1/10 parts per billion atrazine concentration, and atrazine is considered safe in drinking water by the EPA as long as it is in levels no greater than 3 parts per billion. The chytrid fungus is a single-celled fungus. It infects the skin of amphibians. In certain areas, the fungus can live on the skin of an amphibian in lower numbers without causing any harm, but other times, once it infects the body, it alters the fluid balance and ultimately causes heart failure. Some scientists believe that climate change is beginning to produce the perfect environment for the fungus to thrive and become deadly to amphibians. Other scientists believe that we're now dealing with a whole new strain of the fungus. In recent decades, the chytrid fungus has shown up in areas where it was never seen before. Most of the blame for this is put on trade of two particular species of frogs. The African clawed frog is used in labs globally for research, and the North American bullfrog is grown for meat. Both these species are particularly resistant to the fungus, so they can carry and spread it very easily.
I think one of the reasons that amphibians are important is because they have very thin, permeable skin, and so as a result they're particularly sensitive to changes to their environment, the introduction of chemicals, things like that. So for that reason they work really well as sort of a bioindicator of environmental problems, In terms of their role in ecosystems, they're a food source for a lot of birds, like wading birds, and so they're explosive breeders. They often produce huge numbers of offspring, which of course most of those don't survive. But the reason that many of them don't survive is because they serve as food for other species. So I do think that the disappearances of amphibians from ecosystems can have significant effects on other species. I think it's very likely to affect other amphibian species. If a species goes extinct, it might create opportunities for other species to increase in population size. And since many amphibians have toxic secretions in their skin, if you had, say, a palatable species that birds like to eat that went extinct and was replaced by a species that perhaps they would be less likely to eat, that can certainly have significant effects on a bird population, as well as their eggs and tadpoles are food for a lot of fishes as well.
Amphibians are particularly important in their own right. The adults and the eggs both act as a food source for many fish and birds. Within limits, they provide us with chemicals from their skin for pharmaceutical purposes, but most importantly, they, particularly frogs, serve as bioindicators, letting us know when the environment is in harm's way.
Yeah, I think amphibians garnered a lot of attention. I don't know, something like 10 years ago when a lot of malformed individuals were showing up. It was in the news quite a bit. It does make you wonder, though, if people would be more likely to be concerned if it was mammals. I do think there's definitely sort of a bias in terms of people's concern. People tend to care more about things that are more like themselves. So I think the fact that it's happening to amphibians and as popular as frogs can be to a lot of people, they aren't really they aren't cuddly, and so I think we're just a little less empathetic when it comes to what's happening to amphibians versus mammals.
As shown in the graph, amphibians are the most underlisted and underfunded vertebrate group in the United States. Yet at least 36 of the known 300 species in the U.S. are listed as critically imperiled or presumed extinct, and many other species are well on their way to that point. So without sufficient government funding, what can we do to help slow or stop the decline? First, the effects of atrazine need to be made more public, not just for amphibians, but for humans too. Then once that happens, Congress needs to step in above the EPA and ban atrazine just like they did with DDT. We, as a population, need to stop the habitat destruction for unnecessary reasons and monitor more closely what gets into the water via sinks, toilets, etc. We also need to stop the farming of North American bullfrogs for meat to stop or slow the spread of the chytrid fungus and for the greater good of all frogs and amphibians.